For 10 years, Penelope Vance treated the memory of her first husband like a worn-out party anecdote, a story she'd polish and present to her new, glittering circle of friends. He was the starving artist, the charming but clueless dreamer she had the misfortune of marrying in her youth. Each retelling painted her as the clever survivor who escaped a life of mediocrity for one of splendor. She stood tonight, draped in diamonds, on the arm of a real estate tycoon, laughing at the joke she'd made of another man's life. But some stories have a way of writing their own endings, and in the grand ballroom of the Grand Majestic Hotel, the punchline was about to be turned devastatingly on her. The air in the penthouse suite of the Thorne Corporation building was a carefully curated blend of expensive perfume and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the silent air purifiers. It was the smell of untouchable wealth, a fragrance Penelope Vance had grown to consider her own. She stood before a triptych of mirrors, the cool light of the vanity illuminating the severe perfection of her evening gown. The dress, a sheath of midnight blue silk by a designer whose name was a secret, whispered only among the city's elite, clung to her like a second skin. A cascade of sapphires and diamonds, a recent anniversary gift from her husband Richard, rested against her collarbone, cold and heavy. "Is the car ready, darling?" she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous dressing room. She didn't turn her focus entirely on her own reflection. She was adjusting an earring, a single, perfect sapphire that matched the necklace. Richard Thorne appeared behind her in the mirror. He was a man carved from privilege, tall and broad-shouldered, in his bespoke tuxedo. His hair, a distinguished silver at the temples, was impeccably styled. He smelled of aged whiskey and authority. He placed his hands on her bare shoulders, his touch proprietary. "It's been waiting for 15 minutes, Penny," he said, his tone a familiar mix of indulgence and impatience. "The Starlight Gala waits for no one, not even you." She offered him a practiced smile in the reflection. "Let them wait. It builds anticipation." He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "That it does." He surveyed her critically. "You look magnificent. Every man in that room will be jealous." "And every woman," she added, her smile tightening just a fraction. It was not a hope, it was a requirement. As they descended in the private elevator, the city lights of New York sprawling beneath them like a carpet of fallen stars, Penelope felt the familiar thrum of excitement. This was her stage, her arena. The Starlight Foundation Charity Ball was the crown jewel of the autumn social season, a place where fortunes were pledged, alliances were forged, and reputations were made or broken over cocktails and canapes. It was a world away from the life she had once known, a life she had meticulously scrubbed from her history. Riding in the back of the silent, gleaming Rolls-Royce, she scrolled through her phone, a small, dismissive smile playing on her lips. A friend had tagged her in a memory post from over a decade ago. The photo was grainy, taken on an old phone. In it, a younger Penelope was laughing, her hair a wilder shade of blonde, her arm slung around a man with paint-streaked jeans and a hopeful, lopsided grin. "Owen." Richard glanced over. "What's so amusing?" Penelope waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets catching the light. "Oh, nothing. Just a ghost from the past. A little reminder of how far I've come." She enlarged the photo, her expression turning to one of faint disgust. "Look at him. Owen Hayes, my starter husband. He honestly believed he was going to change the world with a paintbrush and a tub of turpentine." Richard grunted, his eyes barely registering the image before turning back to the window. "The artist, right. Whatever happened to him?" "Who knows, who cares," she said with a theatrical shrug. "Last I heard, he'd lost that dreadful little studio in Brooklyn we used to live in. Probably sharing a warehouse with rats in some forgotten corner of the city, still calling himself a visionary." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "I remember the fights we used to have. I wanted to go to galas like this to build a real life. He wanted to spend our last $100 on a rare pigment from Morocco. Can you imagine? She had honed this story over the years, refining it into a tragicomedy in which she was the plucky heroine. In her version of events, she had single-handedly supported his hobby for years, sacrificing her own ambitions for his. She had paid the bills, cooked the meals, and encouraged his delusional dreams until she couldn't take the instability, the constant worry, the smell of paint thinner that clung to everything they owned. Leaving him wasn't a choice, she would tell her friends over brunch. It was an act of self-preservation. Well, you certainly upgraded, Richard said, patting her knee. His compliment was casual, as if he were remarking on a fine piece of furniture he had acquired. To him, that's what she was, his most beautiful acquisition. Penelope knew this, but she accepted the terms. The cage was gilded, after all, and the view was breathtaking. I invested in my future, she corrected him smoothly. I chose reality over fantasy. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Grand Majestic Hotel, a landmark of old New York elegance. Marble columns, a sweeping red carpet, and the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras greeted them. Penelope took a deep, steadying breath. Showtime. As the doorman, clad in a crisp uniform, opened her door, she stepped out, a vision of curated perfection. She smiled for the cameras, her hand resting delicately on Richard's arm. Tonight, she was Mrs. Penelope Thorne, philanthropist, socialite wife of a titan. No one here knew about the tiny paint-splattered apartment in Brooklyn. No one knew about the woman who once believed in a dreamer, and she would make sure it stayed that way. The past was a closed book, a forgotten story, and tonight, of all nights, she was certain nothing could possibly spoil her perfectly constructed world. The Grand Majestic's ballroom was a symphony of opulence. Soaring ceilings dripped with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm golden glow over the 300 guests. The air hummed with the murmur of powerful voices, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet playing in a discreet corner. Penelope moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a queen in her court. She smiled, she air-kissed, she laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and offered compliments she didn't mean. Every interaction was a transaction, a careful deposit into her social capital. "Penelope, you look absolutely divine," gushed a woman named Beatrice, whose face was pulled so tight her expression was one of permanent surprise. "That necklace is to die for." "Richard is far too generous," Penelope replied, touching the sapphires lightly, a gesture of casual ownership. "How are the children?" Beatrice is young, Albert still set on becoming a professional polo player. She drifted from one conversation to the next. Richard, a solid, reassuring presence at her side. He was in his element too, shaking hands with city councilmen and clapping investment bankers on the back. They were the ultimate power couple, a perfect reflection of each other's ambition. An hour into the event, while Richard was deep in conversation with the senator, Penelope found herself by the champagne fountain with a small group of women. One of them, a younger woman named Samantha, who had recently married into their circle, was listening with wide-eyed fascination. "I just can't imagine you living anywhere but Park Avenue, Penelope," Samantha said clearly, having heard the origin story before from the others. Penelope gave a self-deprecating, yet somehow still superior laugh. "Oh, my dear, you have no idea. My first apartment was so small, you could cook dinner and use the toilet at the same time." The women giggled. "And my first husband," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "he thought that was the height of bohemian chic. He called it our creative nest." She rolled her eyes dramatically. The only thing creative in that apartment was the mold growing on the walls. His name was Owen. Sweet, of course. Utterly handsome in a rugged, penniless sort of way. But zero ambition. Absolutely none. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, letting the story hang in the air. This was her favorite part, the part where she became the phoenix who rose from the ashes of a bad decision. "I remember one year for our anniversary, he presented me with a painting, a huge abstract monstrosity of angry red and black slashes. He told me it was called Urban Passion, and that one day It would hang in the Guggenheim. She paused for effect. I told him I'd rather have a working dishwasher. We didn't have one, you see. That was the last anniversary we celebrated. The story was a lie, or at least a grotesque distortion of the truth. The painting had been beautiful, a vibrant and hopeful piece that she had loved. She had cried when he gave it to her, moved by the gesture. The fight about the dishwasher had been a separate mundane argument months later. But over the years, she had conflated the two, twisting the memory into a more compelling narrative of her pragmatism versus his folly. As her audience tittered with appreciative laughter, Penelope's eyes scanned the room, a habit she'd developed to ensure she was always aware of who was watching, who was arriving. Her gaze swept past the bar, over the dance floor, and towards the far entrance. For a fleeting second, her eyes locked on a man standing near the arched doorway, half hidden by a marble pillar. He was tall, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark suit that was a stark contrast to the flashier tuxedos around him. He wasn't looking at her. His attention was on the architectural details of the ceiling, a small, thoughtful smile on his face. There was something about his posture, the quiet confidence in his stance, that was unnervingly familiar. His hair was shorter now, and the boyish softness of his face had been replaced by the sharp, defined lines of a man in his late 30s, but the set of his jaw, the way he held his head. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. No, it couldn't be. She blinked, expecting the mirage to disappear, but he was still there. He turned his head slightly, and the light caught his profile. It was Owen. It was undeniably Owen Hayes. A cold wave washed over her, so intense it made her feel dizzy. What was he doing here in this temple of wealth and influence? It was impossible. He didn't belong. Had he crashed the party? Was he working here? Perhaps he was part of the catering staff or a waiter who had slipped in to watch the spectacle. The thought was so absurdly perfect, so in line with her narrative of his failure, that she almost laughed. She looked for a waiter's uniform, a name tag, any sign that confirmed her assumption. But he wore none. He looked comfortable, at ease. He looked as if he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. He wasn't watching the guests with envy. He was observing the space with an air of appreciation, almost of ownership. "Penelope, are you all right?" Samantha's voice broke through her shock. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Penelope forced a brittle smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm fine, darling. Just a bit warm." She fanned her face with her hand. "I think I need some air." She excused herself, her mind racing. She had to know. She had to understand how the broke, delusional artist from her past had managed to get into the most exclusive gala of the year. Her perfectly constructed world suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the impossible presence of a man she had long since written off as a failure. She watched as he began to walk from the pillar, not towards the kitchens or the service exits, but towards the main stage at the front of the ballroom, where the evening's host was preparing to speak. He moved with a purpose that made her blood run cold. Penelope's feet felt rooted to the plush carpet. She watched, mesmerized with a sense of impending doom, as Owen Hayes made his way toward the front of the ballroom. He wasn't accosted by security. No one tried to stop him. On the contrary, several prominent figures of people Penelope had been trying to get an introduction to all evening nodded at him as he passed. A highly respected judge, a notorious tech billionaire, the city's deputy mayor. They acknowledged him with a deference that baffled and terrified her. Richard reappeared at her side, oblivious to her inner turmoil. "I just sealed the deal for the new downtown condo project," he said, his voice smug. "That senator is more useful than he looks." "Did you get us a table near the stage?" "Richard," Penelope whispered, her voice tight, unable to tear her eyes from the unfolding scene. "Do you see that man? The one walking toward the stage?" Richard followed her gaze, squinting slightly. "The one in the dark suit? Don't know him. Probably some new money tech guy." They're everywhere these days. He dismissed him with a shrug and turned his attention to securing a fresh glass of whiskey from a passing waiter. On stage, Arthur Sterling, the elderly and esteemed chairman of the Starlight Foundation, tapped the microphone. The chatter in the ballroom subsided, all eyes turning forward. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your incredible generosity tonight." Arthur began, his voice warm and familiar. "You have once again shown that New York has the biggest heart in the world. We have raised a record-breaking sum for the children's literacy program." A polite wave of applause filled the room. Penelope barely heard it. Her entire being was focused on Owen, who had now reached the side of the stage, standing in the wings, partially obscured by the heavy velvet curtain. He was speaking quietly with one of the event organizers, who was nodding enthusiastically. "Now," Arthur continued, his smile widening, "we have another reason to celebrate tonight. As many of you know, this magnificent hotel, the Grand Majestic, has been a New York institution for over a century. It has also, in recent years, faced certain financial headwinds." He chose his words diplomatically. Headwinds was a polite term for the fact that the hotel chain was on the brink of bankruptcy, a piece of gossip that had been circulating for months. "The history, the very soul of this building was at risk," Arthur said, his tone growing more dramatic. "But I am overjoyed to announce that the Majestic Hotel Group has been saved. It has been acquired by a visionary investor, a man who not only saw its potential, but cherished its legacy. He is a man who believes in building beautiful things that last." A murmur of intrigued whispers rippled through the audience. This was big news. The fate of the Grand Majestic was a topic of intense speculation on the city's financial pages. Penelope felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. It was a coincidence. It had to be. This new owner has not only secured the future of this hotel and its thousands of employees, Arthur boomed, but he has also, as his first official act, made a personal donation to the Starlight Foundation tonight that has matched every single dollar we have raised. Gasps of astonishment swept the room. Richard let out a low whistle next to her. "My God, that's a hell of a check to write. Must be one of the hedge fund sharks from Greenwich." "It is my distinct honor," Arthur declared, "to introduce you to the new owner of the Majestic Hotel Group. Please welcome Mr. Owen Hayes." The name hit Penelope with the force of a physical blow. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to warp and tilt, the sound fading into a dull roar in her ears. She heard Richard choke on his whiskey. She saw the confused, then astonished faces of the women she had just been regaling with tales of the penniless artist. And then Owen stepped out from behind the curtain and into the spotlight. He didn't look triumphant or arrogant. He looked exactly as he had moments before, calm, confident, and utterly composed. The simple, dark suit now seemed not understated, but a statement of power. It spoke of a man who didn't need sequins or brand names to command a room. His presence alone was enough. He walked to the podium and shook Arthur Sterling's hand. The applause was thunderous, a wave of shock and admiration. People were craning their necks, whispering his name, a name that was, until that very moment, unknown to almost all of them. Owen smiled at the crowd, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. It was the same lopsided grin from that old photograph, but now it held the weight of experience and success. "Thank you, Arthur," he said, his voice smooth and steady, amplified by the microphone. It was a voice Penelope had once heard every day, whispering dreams to her in the dark. Now it filled a ballroom of the most powerful people in the city. "I'm not much for speeches. I've always preferred to let the work speak for itself." He looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the room. Penelope felt a primal urge to hide, to shrink, to disappear into the floor. She was certain his eyes would find her, that he would single her out with a smirk of vindication. But they didn't. His gaze passed over her section, without a flicker of recognition. It was as if she wasn't even there. Or worse, as if she was just another face in a sea of hundreds, completely and utterly insignificant. The indifference was a sharper slap than any accusation could have been. "This hotel is a masterpiece," Owen continued. "Like a great painting, it has layers, history, and a soul. My job is simply to be its custodian, to strip away the varnish of neglect and let it shine again. I believe in its future, and I believe in the future of this city. Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause." He kept it short and humble. He didn't boast. He didn't preen. He simply stated his intention and stepped back from the podium. The applause was even louder this time. Penelope stood frozen, a statue of silk and sapphires. The world she had so carefully built, the narrative she had so meticulously crafted, had been demolished in less than 5 minutes. The man she had mocked for a decade, the man she had used as a cautionary tale of failure, now owned the very ground on which she stood. He was not a forgotten ghost from her past. He was the king of the castle she was merely a guest in. Richard finally found his voice. "Hayes," he hissed, his face pale with shock. "Owen Hayes. You're Owen." It can't be. But it was. And as Penelope watched him descend the stage, immediately surrounded by a throng of the city's most influential people, all desperate for a moment of his time, she knew that her life as she knew it was over. Humiliation was a hot, bitter poison flooding Penelope's veins. Every glance from across the room felt like an accusation. The women she'd been gossiping with were now whispering amongst themselves, their eyes darting between her and the magnetic new center of gravity in the room. Her story, her hilarious anecdote about the starving artist, had just become the most embarrassing gaffe of the social season. She was a punchline. Richard, recovering from his initial shock, was already calculating. His mind, always a whirring abacus of profit and loss, was recalibrating the situation. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, not with disdain, but with a dawning rapacious interest. "Where did he get that kind of money? Tech investments, my God. Penny, you were married to him." His words weren't a comfort. They were an indictment. He wasn't seeing his humiliated wife. He was seeing a missed opportunity, a connection he never knew he had. "I have to go talk to him," Penelope said, her voice dangerously low. She began to push her way through the crowd, her movements stiff and robotic. "What, Penny, don't," Richard hissed, grabbing her elbow. "Don't make a scene. We need to play this smart." She wrenched her arm away. "I am not making a scene. I just want to, congratulate him." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't know what she wanted. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to wipe the serene, confident look off his face. She wanted to understand how the universe could allow this to happen. Owen was surrounded, a calm island in a sea of fawning admirers. Penelope used her socialite's armor, a polite but unyielding "excuse me," to cut a path directly to him. As she drew closer, she saw the deputy mayor clap him on the shoulder and laugh at something he said. She saw the tech billionaire, a man who famously never gave anyone the time of day, listening to Owen with rapt attention. Finally, she broke through the inner circle. "Owen," she said. The name spoken aloud by her seemed to momentarily silence the chatter around them. The small group turned to look at her. Owen turned last. His eyes finally met hers, and for the first time that night, he truly saw her. There was no anger in his expression, no triumph, just a flicker of mild surprise, as if he were noticing a piece of furniture he hadn't expected to be there. "Penelope," he said, his tone perfectly level. He nodded politely. "Good to see you. You know that the deputy mayor, I believe." He was treating her like any other guest, a casual acquaintance. The sheer breathtaking nerve of it stole her breath. "I need to speak with you," she said, ignoring the others. "Alone." A few awkward glances were exchanged. The deputy mayor cleared his throat. "Well, Hayes, we'll let you catch up. We'll talk next week." The group dissolved, leaving Penelope and Owen standing in a small charged bubble of silence amidst the ballroom's din. You look well, he said, his eyes giving her a quick, dispassionate appraisal. Richard is treating you well? Don't you dare, she seethed, her voice a venomous whisper. Don't you dare stand here and pretend this is some chance meeting. You did this on purpose, didn't you, all of it? Buying this hotel, as this gala. You did it all to humiliate me. Owen looked at her, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. It was a smile of pity, and it infuriated her more than any insult could have. You really believe that, don't you? He said, his voice quiet. You still think the world revolves around you, Penelope? I'm sorry to disappoint you, but my life for the past 10 years has had absolutely nothing to do with you. Liar, she spat. You were a failure. You had nothing. We had nothing. Where did all this come from? You're right. We had nothing. He agreed, his voice still infuriatingly calm. Because everything we had, every dollar I made from selling my early paintings, every bit of savings I had from my grandfather, went into your first business. Penelope stared at him, her mind blanking. What? What are you talking about? My boutique? My father gave me the seed money for that. Owen let out a soft, weary sigh. No, Penny. Your father gave you enough to rent the space for 3 months. When you were about to be evicted, when your first designer line didn't sell, you told me you were going to lose everything. You were devastated. So I sold the one thing I had of any value. He paused, his gaze becoming distant. It was a collection of early concept sketches from a fairly famous abstract expressionist. My grandfather had bought them for a pittance in the 50s. They were my inheritance, my inspiration. I sold them to an overseas collector for $80,000. It was enough to keep your boutique afloat for another year, enough time for you to finally land a major client and attract real investors, including Richard. The ballroom seemed to recede. Penelope couldn't breathe. She remembered the money. It had appeared in their bank account one day. Owen had told her he'd sold a few pieces to a patron. She had been so relieved, so consumed with her own budding success, that she hadn't questioned it. She'd assumed he meant a few of his own canvases for a few $100s. I asked you not to tell your father, Owen continued softly. Your pride was so important to you. You wanted to believe you had done it all on your own. I let you believe it. Why? The word was a strangled whisper. Because I loved you, he said simply, without a trace of sentimentality. It was a statement of a past fact, like saying the sky was once blue. And then, a few months later, after you'd met Richard at that trade show, you told me my lack of ambition was holding you back. You said you needed to be with a man who could provide stability. You left. I never saw the $80,000 again. But that's okay. I considered it a severance package. He looked away, his attention already drifting. My success. It came later. I started over. I got into digital art and environmental design. I founded a small tech company that created immersive architectural software. It did very, very well. I invested wisely. This hotel is just the latest project. I bought it because it's beautiful and I wanted to save it. That's the whole story. It was never about you. Every word was a chisel, chipping away at the marble facade of her life, revealing the rotten core beneath. Her success, the very foundation upon which she had built her new identity, was funded by the man she had ridiculed. He hadn't been the anchor weighing her down. He had been the unseen current lifting her up. And she had abandoned the ship the moment she reached the shore. Before she could form a reply, Richard was there, a broad, false smile plastered on his face. He clapped Owen on the back as if they were old friends. Owen, my boy, it's been too long, Richard boomed. Penelope was just telling me the great news. We have to catch up. I want to hear everything. In fact, let's have lunch next week. My office. We can talk synergy. I have a few properties that might be perfect for your portfolio. Penelope looked from her fawning, opportunistic husband to the calm, detached man he was trying to impress. The man she had discarded. The man who had, with a few quiet sentences, completely and irrevocably destroyed her. The ride home was a study in suffocating silence. The soft leather of the Rolls-Royce seats, usually a source of comfort and pride for Penelope, now felt like the interior of a hearse. She stared out the window, the glittering New York skyline, a blur of mocking lights. The weight of Owen's revelations pressed down on her, a physical pressure in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Richard, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with a manic energy. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the avaricious glee of a predator who had just stumbled upon a new rich hunting ground. He was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, as he dictated a message to his assistant. "Janet, cancel my Tuesday lunch with the Henderson group. I want you to get me a reservation at Per Se, the best table, for two. The guest is Owen Hayes. Yes, Hayes. He's the new owner of the Majestic Group. Spare no expense, and get me a full financial workup on his company. Ethelred Designs. I want to know everything. His net worth, his recent acquisitions, his board of directors. Everything. By morning." He ended the message and tossed the phone onto the seat beside him, a triumphant look on his face. He finally seemed to notice Penelope's catatonic state. "Can you believe it?" he said, shaking his head. "Owen Hayes. All that time you never mentioned he was sitting on a gold mine." "He wasn't," Penelope said, her voice flat and dead. "He had nothing. Clearly you were mistaken." Richard scoffed, dismissing her lived experience with a wave of his hand. "The man owns half of prime Manhattan now, it seems. You know, Penny, for someone so smart about social climbing, you really missed the boat on that one. Imagine if you'd stuck with him." The casual cruelty of his words barely registered. She was still reeling from the knowledge that her own success story was a fraud. Her first boutique, the achievement she had held up as proof of her superior business acumen, compared to Owen's artistic fluff, it was all built on his sacrifice. "Did you hear what he said back there?" Richard barreled on, oblivious. "His company, Ethelred Designs, they're the ones behind the new Hudson Yards smart building. That project is worth billions, and you were married to him. This is a golden opportunity, Penny. We can leverage this. A personal connection is worth more than any introduction." "Leverage this," she finally snapped, turning to face him. Her eyes, shadowed and hollow, burned with a cold fury. "Is that all you can think about? Money opportunity? My entire life was just revealed to be a lie, and you're thinking about synergy?" Richard looked genuinely baffled by her outburst. "What are you talking about? What lie? So your ex-husband got lucky. Good for him. Now it can be good for us. You should be happy. This connection elevates us. It elevates you." "He paid for my business, Richard," she cried, the words tearing from her throat. "The boutique that got me started, the one you said showed such impressive initiative when we first met. He paid for it. He sold his grandfather's art collection to save me, and I left him months later because I thought he was a failure." For the first time, Richard was silent. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. She expected shock, maybe even a hint of compassion. Instead, his face slowly hardened into a mask of cold calculation. $80,000? He finally asked, his voice quiet. Penelope nodded, bewildered by the question. Richard let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor. 80,000, Penny. I've spent more than that on your jewelry in the last 6 months. My God, you had me worried for a second. That's what this melodrama is about. A pittance he gave you a decade ago." He leaned back against the seat, shaking his head in disbelief. "That's not a secret that changes anything. It's a mildly interesting historical footnote. In fact, it's better this way. It means he has a soft spot for you. He helped you once, he might help again. We're a little over-leveraged on the new Miami property. A friendly investor could be very helpful." The cold, brutal clarity of his words washed over Penelope. There was no us in his calculations. There was only him, his business, his reputation. She wasn't his partner. She was an asset, and her connection to Owen Hayes had just dramatically increased her market value in his eyes. The stability she had craved, the solid foundation she thought Richard represented, was an illusion. He was just as much of a gambler as Owen had ever been. Only his chips were concrete and steel instead of canvas and paint. His cage wasn't just gilded, it was mortgaged to the hilt. "You are unbelievable," she whispered, a sense of profound emptiness opening up inside her. "You feel nothing for me in this moment except for how I can be useful to you." "Don't be so dramatic, Penelope," he said, his tone turning sharp and dismissive, the indulgent husband persona gone completely. "This is the world we live in. It's the world you chose. You wanted reality over fantasy, remember? Well, this is reality. It's about assets and leverage, and staying on top. Your ex-husband is now a major player, so stop your pouting and start thinking about what you're going to wear to that lunch I'm going to have with him." The car glided to a stop in the private garage beneath their penthouse. The engine cut off, plunging them into an even deeper silence. Penelope looked at the man beside her, this handsome, powerful stranger she had married. She had mocked Owen for being a dreamer, but at least his dreams had been about creating something beautiful. Richard's only dream was to acquire. She had traded a man who had sacrificed his most prized possession for her happiness for a man who would sacrifice her for a better deal. The facade of her perfect life had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces at her feet. Penelope didn't follow Richard out of the car. She sat in the silent tomb-like garage until the chauffeur cleared his throat uncomfortably, a signal that he needed to lock up. She took the public elevator up to the lobby, avoiding the direct route to her penthouse cage. She needed to walk. She needed air. The lobby of their building was a sterile expanse of marble and glass, manned by a doorman who greeted her with a polite but impersonal nod. She walked out onto the street, the late-night chill of the New York air a welcome shock to her system. She walked aimlessly, the clicking of her heels, on the pavement, the only sound she could focus on. The sapphires around her neck felt like a slave's collar. After several blocks, her phone buzzed in her clutch. It wasn't Richard. The name on the screen was one she hadn't seen in years, Claire Jensen. Claire had been her best friend in her before life. She had been the maid of honor at her wedding to Owen. A fellow artist, a ceramicist, she and Owen had shared a studio space for a time. When Penelope left Owen, she had also left Claire behind, finding her earnest, dirt-under-the-fingernails lifestyle incompatible with her new polished world. Claire had tried to call a few times in the early years, but Penelope had never answered. Eventually, the call stopped. Hesitantly, Penelope answered. "Hello, Penny, it's Claire. I saw you on the news feed from the Starlight Gala." Her voice was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure what to expect. "And I saw Owen." Penelope leaned against the cold stone of a building, closing her eyes. "Yes, the whole world saw Owen." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, and the genuine, unvarnished concern in her voice was so foreign that it almost made Penelope break down. "No," she admitted the word, barely a whisper. "I'm not." "I figured," Claire said softly. "Look, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm at an all-night diner. The Bluebird on Lexington. Do you remember it? We used to go there after gallery openings." Penelope remembered. Greasy fries and endless cups of coffee at 3 in the morning, buzzing with ideas and excitement. A lifetime ago. "I'm not far from there," she found herself saying. "Come," Claire said simply. "I'll get you a coffee." 20 minutes later, Penelope slid into a cracked vinyl booth opposite Claire. The diner was a time capsule smelling of stale coffee and fried onions. Claire looked exactly the same, yet different. Her hair was still a riot of dark curls, now streaked with a little grey. She wore a paint-splattered denim jacket, but her eyes, the same sharp, intelligent eyes, held a new depth, a new calmness. And on the third finger of her left hand was a simple, elegant silver band that Penelope had never seen before. A waitress slammed 2 mugs of coffee on the table. For a few minutes they sat in silence, the awkwardness of a decade of neglect stretching between them. "I heard the story you used to tell," Claire said finally, not looking at Penelope, but stirring her coffee with a spoon. "About Owen, the urban passion painting, and the dishwasher. Beatrice, the woman with the surprised face, her daughter takes pottery classes at my studio. She loves to gossip." Penelope flushed with shame, staring down at her own manicured hands. "Claire, It's okay," Claire interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not why I called. I called because I figured the truth probably came out tonight in one way or another. And I thought you deserved to know all of it." "All of it?" Penelope asked, looking up. "I know he sold his grandfather's sketches to fund my boutique. He told me." Claire smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "That was the second time he saved you Penny. The first time was the reason he had to sell them in the first place." Penelope frowned, confused. "What are you talking about? Do you remember that trip you took to Milan for the Fashion Expo? Right before you opened your shop?" Claire asked. "You used your credit cards, convinced you'd make it all back when you made your first big order." Penelope nodded slowly. The trip had been a disaster. She'd been naive, overspent, wildly, and come back with nothing but a mountain of debt. It had been one of the lowest points in her life. "You came back in tears," Claire continued. "You had nearly $30,000 in credit card debt, and the interest was piling up. You were getting threatening letters. You told Owen you were ruined before you'd even begun. You said your father would kill you if he found out." The memory was coming back now, a dark shape she had locked away in a deep vault in her mind. She had been hysterical, convinced her life was over. "Owen calmed you down," Claire said, her eyes finally meeting Penelope's. "He told you not to worry, that he'd handle it. And he did. He took a job. A horrible, soul-crushing job." "What job?" "He was painting." "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "His painting commissions weren't enough. He took a night job at a chemical processing plant in New Jersey. The graveyard shift. 12 hours a night, 6 nights a week, handling industrial solvents. The pay was good, because the work was dangerous. He did it for 6 months, Penny. He would come to the studio in the morning, stinking of chemicals. His hands raw and cracked, too exhausted to even lift a brush. He funneled every single paycheck into your credit card debt until it was gone. He never told you where the money was coming from. He let you believe he'd just been incredibly lucky with a few art sales." Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered how tired he had been during that time, how he'd lost weight, how the smell of turpentine in their apartment had been replaced by a sharper, acrid chemical smell she couldn't identify. She had complained about it. She had accused him of not focusing enough on his real work. "By the time your debt was paid off," Claire said, her voice heavy with the weight of the memory, "the art market had shifted. The patron who had been buying his smaller pieces had moved on. He'd lost his momentum. He had nothing left in his savings. So when you came to him a few months later, panicking about the boutique, going under the only asset he had left to sell was his grandfather's collection. He didn't just give you his inheritance, Penny. He gave you his health, his time, and his own artistic future first. He paid off your mistakes, and then he funded your dream. All you ever saw was the man who was too tired to paint." A single hot tear traced a path through Penelope's perfect makeup, dripping onto the grimy table. The story she had told for 10 years wasn't just a distortion of the truth. It was a complete and utter fiction, a monstrous inversion of reality. She hadn't been the hero escaping a sinking ship. She had been the one who had bored holes in the hull and then blamed the captain for taking on water before climbing into a lifeboat he had built for her. Claire reached across the table and placed her hand over Penelope's. Her hand was warm and calloused from her work with clay. "He's a good man, Penny," she said softly. "He deserved better." She paused, then added, "He's married now, you know, to a lovely woman, an architect. They met through his company. They have a daughter." That was the final blow. the confirmation that his life had not only continued without her, but had blossomed into something full and happy. He had a family, a child, a real life built not on lies and acquisitions, but on genuine success, and she presumed genuine love. She looked at her old friend. "Thank you for telling me, Claire," she whispered. The shame was a physical thing, a crushing weight that felt like it might pulverize her bones. There was no coming back from this. There was no way to re-spin the narrative. There was only the ugly, horrifying truth. Walking back to the penthouse felt like climbing a mountain. Each step was a monumental effort. When she finally let herself into the silent, darkened apartment, the opulence that had once been her armor now felt like a mockery. The vast empty rooms, the cold marble floors, the impersonal art on the walls, it was a mausoleum for a life that had never been real. Richard was asleep, or pretending to be. He lay on his side of the enormous bed, his breathing even. He hadn't called to see if she was okay. He hadn't waited up for her. Her emotional crisis was an inconvenience, a distraction from his new business obsession. For the first time, looking at his perfectly composed, sleeping face, she felt nothing. Not love, not anger, not even disappointment, just a profound and hollow emptiness. She went into her cavernous dressing room and stood before the triptych of mirrors, just as she had hours before. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Her makeup was smudged, her hair had lost its perfect coif, but the change was deeper than that. The confident, imperious mask of Penelope Thorne had been shattered, and underneath was just Penelope, a woman who had built her entire identity on a foundation of lies and omissions. A woman who had taken everything from a man who gave her everything and then vilified him for it. She slowly unclasped the heavy sapphire necklace and let it fall onto the marble vanity with a clatter. It looked like a piece of costume jewelry, now gaudy and meaningless. She took off the earrings, the bracelets, the ridiculously expensive watch. She stripped away the symbols of her gilded cage until she was standing in nothing but the silk gown, which now felt like a shroud. Who was she, without the Thorne name, without the jewels, without the story of her brilliant escape from a mediocre life? The question hung in the silent room, vast and terrifying. She had spent a decade meticulously crafting an image, a brand. And tonight, Owen and Claire had, with a few quiet truths, burned it to the ground. The irony was crushing. She had left Owen because she feared a life of instability, of not knowing where the next paycheck would come from. Yet her life with Richard was revealed to be just as precarious, dependent on market fluctuations, leveraged deals, and the whims of men more powerful than he was. She had traded one perceived uncertainty for another, far more insidious one. Owen's world, for all its early struggles, had been built on a foundation of passion, creativity, and integrity. Richard's was built on debt opportunism and a bottomless hunger for more. And Owen, he had a wife, a daughter, a life filled with creation and love. He hadn't needed revenge. His victory wasn't in showing Penelope how wrong she was. His victory was in his own happiness, a happiness that had absolutely nothing to do with her. It was the most complete and devastating victory imaginable. He hadn't just won the game, he'd left the stadium and gone off to build his own better one, forgetting she was ever a player. A wave of something she hadn't felt in years washed over her grief. She grieved for the man she had thrown away. She grieved for the woman she might have become if she had stayed, if she had believed in him, if she had believed in them. She grieved for the wasted decades spent polishing a false idol of a life, while the real treasure had been discarded and forgotten. She walked out onto the balcony. The city was quieter now, the endless traffic a distant hum. The cool night air felt clean, real. She looked down at the streets below, at the millions of lives unfolding in the buildings that stretched to the sky. Owen didn't just own one of those buildings now. He was a part of that creative, constructive energy. He was a builder. And what was she? A decorator? An accessory? There was no easy path forward. An apology to Owen felt laughably inadequate. It would be for her own absolution, not for him. He didn't need it. Reconciling with Richard was impossible. She could no longer unsee the cold, calculating man behind the charming facade. Staying in this life, continuing the charade, felt like a slow, certain spiritual death. For the first time in 10 years, Penelope Vance had no idea what she was going to do tomorrow. The script she had written for her life had been torn to shreds. All she was left with was the raw, painful, and undeniable truth. She was alone in a penthouse she didn't earn, in a life she didn't respect, in a city full of possibilities she had been too blind to see. She looked up at the sliver of moon hanging in the dark sky. It was a blank page, a terrifying yet strangely liberating prospect. The reckoning had come. The old Penelope was gone, exposed as a fraud. The question whispered into the vast New York night was who, if anyone, would be left to rise from her ashes. Penelope's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that the narratives we build about our lives and about others can be fragile things. The truth has a way of showing up unannounced, often in the most spectacular fashion. She spent years mocking the man who secretly funded her success, only to have her world dismantled, not by his revenge, but by his quiet, indifferent triumph. It forces us to ask ourselves, are the stories we tell ourselves true? Are we the heroes of our own journey, or have we cast someone else as the villain, simply to justify our own choices? What would you do if you were Penelope, standing on that balcony, with the ruins of your life at your feet? Is redemption possible for someone who has built their world on such a profound lie? Can a person truly change after a decade of self-deception? We would love to hear your thoughts on this complex, dramatic, and all too real story. Please share your opinions and what you think she should do next in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates a tale of karma and consequence, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas. He thought the greatest day of his life was the day she left. He saw her a year later, a ghost from his past, dressed in what he called pathetic simple clothes. He laughed standing beside his glamorous fiancée, a woman draped in a one-of-a-kind designer gown that screamed wealth and success. But what he didn't know, what the whole world was about to find out, was that the woman he was mocking, his insignificant ex-wife Evelyn, hadn't just admired that dress. She had sketched it, stitched it, and created it. This is the story of how a man's cruel mockery became the spotlight for his own public humiliation. The air in the Corinthian ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Foundation, a night where New York's elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. Arthur Penhaligon navigated the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was born to be in such rooms. On his arm, a perfect accessory to his tailored Tom Ford suit, was Bethany Cole, his fiancée. Her laughter was like the chime of tiny, expensive bells, and her presence turned heads, mostly because of the dress. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light of the chandeliers. It fell in a column, simple in its silhouette, but breathtakingly complex in its construction. A cascade of hand-stitched, gunmetal grey beadwork traced the line of her collarbone and wrapped around one shoulder, resembling a delicate frozen branch of a winter tree. It was elegant, exclusive, and whispered a price tag that would make most people gasp. Arthur was preening. Every admiring glance at Bethany was a victory for him. It was validation. He had traded up. He had won. And then he saw her. Across the room, near a less populated bar, stood Evelyn Reed, his ex-wife. It took him a moment to be sure. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey sheath dress made of a soft matty fabric. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and her face was almost bare of makeup. Beside the shimmering peacocking crowd, she looked like a sparrow in a flock of birds of paradise. A nasty, triumphant smile curled Arthur's lip. Well, well, he murmured to Bethany, his voice a low thrum of condescension. Look what the cat dragged in. Bethany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing slightly. Who is that Evelyn? My ex-Arthur said the word ex, laced with a satisfaction that was almost palpable. Can you believe it? I haven't seen her since the divorce. Looks like life hasn't been too kind. He decided to approach her. It was a power move, a public demonstration of his new improved life. Bethany, sensing the drama, clung to his arm, a silent co-conspirator. Evelyn was speaking to the bartender when Arthur's shadow fell over her. Evelyn, he said, his voice offensively smooth. She turned, and her eyes, a calm, clear grey, met his. There was a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a polite, neutral expression. Arthur. She acknowledged, her voice even. She glanced at the woman on his arm. I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Bethany Cole, Arthur announced, practically puffing out his chest. Bethany, this is Evelyn Reed. A pleasure, Bethany said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The judgment was clear. You too? Evelyn replied, her gaze briefly falling on the midnight blue dress. A strange, unreadable emotion passed through her eyes before she met Bethany's gaze again. That's a stunning gown. Bethany brightened instantly. Oh, thank you. It's a custom piece from a new designer, Aura. Have you heard of them? Probably not. They're incredibly exclusive. It took my father's connections just to get a consultation. Arthur chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. I don't think Aura is on Evelyn's radar, darling. She always did favor minimalism. He gestured vaguely at her charcoal dress. Still keeping it simple, I see. Very practical. The insult was designed to sting, to remind her of every time he had criticized her for not being flashy enough, for preferring quality and comfort over loud brand names. During their marriage, he had constantly tried to mold her into a society wife, buying her clothes. She hated pushing her into circles where she felt like an imposter. Her refusal, her quiet insistence on being herself, had been a major point of contention. Evelyn's composure didn't crack. She simply offered a small, tight smile. Practicality has its merits, Arthur. It lasts. So do investments. Arthur shot back pointedly, adjusting the cufflink that peeked from his sleeve. And I've always believed in investing in the best. Bethany looks like a queen, don't you think? She looks beautiful. Evelyn agreed, her voice still unnervingly calm. The lack of a wounded reaction was starting to irritate Arthur. He wanted to see a flash of envy, a hint of regret. He saw nothing. It was like talking to a placid lake. Well, we should be getting back to our table, he said, his tone dismissive. It was interesting seeing you, Evelyn. Try to enjoy the canapes. With a final triumphant smirk, he steered Bethany away, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the bar. My God, she was dreary, Bethany whispered once they were out of earshot. That dress looked like something my grandmother would wear to a funeral. You were married to that, a youthful mistake, Arthur said, waving a hand as if to erase the memory. She had no ambition, no understanding of how the world works. It's all about presentation, darling. Always has been. The life I have with you... This, he squeezed her arm. This is the life I was meant for. He glanced back across the ballroom. Evelyn was no longer at the bar. She had vanished back into the sea of anonymous faces, a plain, grey stone swallowed by a glittering tide. He felt a surge of pride. He had shown her exactly what she had lost. He had stood before her, a titan of success, with a goddess on his arm, while she looked like a forgotten relic. He was completely, blissfully, and catastrophically unaware that the foundation of his entire triumphant moment, the very dress that symbolized his victory, was an intricate lie that was about to unravel his entire world. The Corinthian ballroom's opulence felt a world away from the quiet, ordered sanctuary of Evelyn's studio. Located on the third floor of a pre-war building in a district known more for its artisan bakeries than its high-fashion boutiques, the space was her haven. It was one large room with soaring ceilings and massive paned windows that flooded the space with the soft grey light of the city. One wall was covered in corkboard, a chaotic but meticulous collage of fabric swatches, charcoal sketches, and anatomical drawings of the human form in motion. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, some bare others draped in muslin prototypes. Bolts of exquisite fabric, cashmere silk, charmeuse, and heavy wool crepe were stacked neatly on industrial shelving. The only sound was the gentle hum of her professional-grade sewing machine and the quiet scratch of a pencil against thick paper. Evelyn sat at her large drafting table, her back straight, the charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala still on. She wasn't designing, she was simply holding a pencil, staring at a blank sheet. The encounter with Arthur hadn't broken her, but it had left a deep, familiar ache. His words echoed in her mind, still keeping it simple. Very practical. He had always used the word simple like a weapon, equating it with unambitious and lacking. He couldn't comprehend that for Evelyn, simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. It was about stripping away the non-essential to reveal the perfect line, the flawless cut, the soul of the garment. It was a philosophy she had poured into her work, into her life, and into the very brand she was building. A key turned in the lock and the door opened to reveal Finn O'Connell, her business partner and fiercely loyal friend. He was a whirlwind of creative energy, with a shock of red hair that refused to be tamed, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. He took one look at her rigid posture and the untouched sketchbook and knew. So he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table, "You saw him." Evelyn finally looked up, her grey eyes clouded. And his fiancée, Bethany Cole. Ah, the Cole heiress. Of coal, mining and minerals. Of course, Finn said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned against the table. Let me guess, he was a complete ass. A small, wry smile touched Evelyn's lips. He hasn't changed. He mocked my dress. Finn glanced at her charcoal sheath. The Clara. One of our best sellers from the ready-to-wear line. The one that sold out in 3 days on Net-a-Porter. That dress, the very same, Evelyn confirmed. He called it practical. Finn snorted. The man wouldn't know good design if it bit him on his perfectly tailored backside. What about the fiancée? What was she wearing? This was the question Evelyn had been dreading and anticipating. She took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth a small comfort. She was wearing the Celeste. Finn froze his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He stared at her. The Celeste Wambig gown was not part of their ready-to-wear collection. It was a couture piece, a one-of-a-kind commission. It was the dress with the midnight silk and the hand-beaded gunmetal branch. It was to date the most ambitious, expensive and difficult piece their small atelier had ever produced. No, Finn, whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're kidding me. She was wearing the dress. The very same, Evelyn repeated, a hint of the night's strange irony finally bubbling to the surface. She was very proud of it. Told me it was by an exclusive new designer called Aura. Finn threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the quiet studio, chasing away the lingering ghosts of the ballroom. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic justice of the highest order. The man who mocked your clothes is paying a fortune to drape his new toy in them. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. Evelyn said, the tightness in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Aura was her creation born from the ashes of her marriage. When she and Arthur divorced, she had taken her settlement, a sum he'd considered a paltry but fair price to be rid of her, and poured every cent into this studio. She had made a conscious decision to separate her name, Evelyn Reed, from her work. Her name was tainted by its association with him, by the society pages that had painted her as his dowdy, uninteresting wife. She wanted her designs to stand on their own, and so Aura was born. It was anonymous, mysterious. There was no face to the brand, only a philosophy, understated, luxury, impeccable craftsmanship, and timeless design. Finn handled the business and marketing masterfully, building a cult following based on whispers and exclusivity. They started with a small, ready-to-wear collection, sold through a few high-end online retailers. The pieces, like the Clara dress Evelyn wore, were praised for their quality and cut. The couture line was a new, more ambitious venture. They took on only a handful of commissions, vetted through a discreet agent. The client never met the designer. All communication went through the agent, ensuring Evelyn's anonymity. The Celeste gown for Bethany Cole had been their biggest commission yet. Evelyn had spent over 200 hours on the beadwork alone, her fingers raw, her eyes strained, pouring her pain, her resilience, and her artistry into every tiny stitch. The dress was a piece of her soul. "And you didn't say a word?" Finn asked, his eyes dancing. "Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. You just stood there and let him mock the Clara while his fiancée was wearing your masterpiece." "What was I to say?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. "Arthur, you colossal fool. You just paid a down payment on a condominium for the dress your fiancée is wearing. And it was made by me, the woman you called worthless." "Yes, that's exactly what you should have said," Finn exclaimed. "I would have paid to see his face." "No," Evelyn said, shaking her head. "That's his game. Public scenes, grand gestures, humiliation. My success has nothing to do with him. Aura's success is about the work. It has to remain that way." Finn's expression softened. He understood. This wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, not in the way Arthur would understand it. This was about reclamation. It was about proving to herself that the part of her Arthur had tried to extinguish her creativity, her quiet strength, was actually her greatest asset. "Okay, boss," he said gently. "But you have to admit there's a certain delicious irony to it all." "The irony is not lost on me," she admitted, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She looked around her studio at the tools of her trade, the evidence of her hard work. This was her world, not the Corinthian ballroom, not Arthur Penhaligon's sphere of influence. She had spent years feeling small in his shadow. That night, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in his shadow at all. She was in her own light, a light so bright he couldn't even see it. He just saw a simple grey dress, while unknowingly basking in the glow of her true brilliant work. The game had changed, and Arthur didn't even know he was a player. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the name Aura became something of a mantra in the Penhaligon Cole household, or rather in the sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment Arthur had purchased in anticipation of his new life with Bethany. Bethany was obsessed. "They say she's a total recluse," she said one evening, scrolling feverishly through a fashion blog on her tablet. She was lounging on a vast white sofa that had cost more than Evelyn's first car. The designer. No one has ever seen her. Some people think Aura is a collective of European artisans. Others say it's the secret side project of a famous, established designer who wants to be more experimental. Arthur grunted from behind his laptop. He was reviewing market analytics. His brow furrowed in concentration. A major energy stock he'd bet heavily on had taken a sudden sharp downturn, and it was making him nervous. "As long as they keep making dresses that make you look good. Who cares?" he said, not looking up. "I care," Bethany retorted, tossing the tablet onto the cushion beside her. "It's about more than the dress, Arthur. It's about the story, the mystery." Genevieve Dubois just mentioned them in her latest column. She called Aura the most exciting new voice in couture. The name Genevieve Dubois made Arthur pause. Dubois was the editor-in-chief of Elan, the undisputed Bible of the fashion world. Her word could make or break a brand overnight. If she was praising Aura, then Bethany's dress wasn't just a dress. It was a cultural artifact. "Good," he said, trying to sound pleased. That means your investment paid off. I want another one, Bethany declared. Arthur finally looked up from his screen. Another one, Bethany. That dress cost a fortune, and it was worth every penny. I want Aura to design my wedding dress. Arthur's jaw tightened. The wedding was 6 months away, a lavish affair at her family's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was more than a wedding, it was a merger. The union of Penhaligon ambition and Cole old money. He was counting on the financial stability this marriage would bring him, especially now with his portfolio looking increasingly volatile. He needed to keep Bethany happy, but a custom Aura wedding gown, the cost would be astronomical. Darling, that's a wonderful idea, he said, forcing a smile. But you said yourself how hard it was to get the first one. Are you sure they even do wedding gowns? I've already had my father's assistant reach out to the agent. Bethany said, her tone triumphant. They're considering it. They want a design proposal and a full creative brief. They're playing hard to get, which only makes me want it more. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. He was a man who moved markets, who commanded respect. The idea of having to court some mysterious, faceless designer for the privilege of giving them an obscene amount of money was galling. It flew in the face of his entire worldview, where money and status were the keys that opened every door. It's just a dress, Bethany? He said, his patience wearing thin. No, it's the dress, she shot back, her voice rising. Don't you get it? This is our wedding. Genevieve Dubois will be there. Everyone will be there. I want to be wearing Aura. It says that we're on the inside, that we're ahead of the curve. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He saw the logic in her argument. The wedding was a performance, and they needed the right costumes. An Aura gown would be a statement. It would cement their status as the city's new power couple. It was an investment in their brand. All right, he conceded. All right, see what their agent says. He returned to his laptop, but his concentration was broken. He thought back to the night of the gala, to Evelyn in her drab little dress. The contrast between her and Bethany had been so satisfying. Evelyn represented his past, quiet, unassuming, and in his mind utterly devoid of the hunger required to succeed. Bethany was his future, bright, bold, and draped in the very definition of success. Yet there was a nagging dissonance. Evelyn's calmness at the gala had been unsettling. She should have been devastated. She should have looked up at him with longing and regret. Instead, she had looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. It was absurd. What could she possibly have to pity him for? His phone buzzed. It was a market alert. The energy stock had dropped another 4%. A knot of cold dread tightened in his stomach. He was more exposed on this position than he'd let on to anyone, even Bethany. He had leveraged other assets to increase his stake, sure of a quick and massive return. It had been a gamble, a move to secure the kind of wealth that would finally place him beyond the reach of the old money snobbery of families like the Coles. Now that gamble was threatening to blow up in his face. He looked over at Bethany, who was once again lost in her tablet, happily pinning ideas for her Aura-designed wedding. Her family's fortune was the safety net he was counting on. The wedding couldn't just happen. It had to be perfect. Her happiness was paramount. Suddenly, the Aura dress wasn't just a frivolous expense anymore. It was a critical component of the plan. It was the price of keeping the dream alive. Find out what they need, he said, his voice harder than before. Whatever the cost, whatever they want, get it done. Bethany looked up, a radiant smile on her face. I knew you'd understand. He didn't understand. Not really. He didn't understand the obsession, the mystery, or the power this invisible designer held. He just understood that in his world, which was beginning to show faint but terrifying cracks, appearances were everything. And the appearance of success, symbolized by a dress from a designer named Aura, was something he desperately needed to maintain. The name Aura began to spread through the elite circles of New York like a secret language. It was a whisper at cocktail parties, a name drop in the front rows of Fashion Week, a tag on the most exclusive social media accounts. The mystery surrounding the designer only fueled the brand's meteoric rise. Aura wasn't just fashion, it was a phenomenon. Finn was a master at stoking the flames. He orchestrated a series of calculated leaks and placements. A renowned actress was photographed at LAX wearing an Aura cashmere travel set looking effortlessly chic. A French heiress was spotted in St. Bart's in a deceptively simple Aura linen sundress. Each piece was instantly recognizable by its cut and quality, yet devoid of any logo. The lack of branding became the brand. Then came the feature in Elan. Genevieve Dubois dedicated a full 2 pages to Aura, not with flashy photographs, but with elegant prose and artistic sketches of the designs. The article titled "The Architecture of Silence" was a love letter to the brand's philosophy. In an age of deafening logos and celebrity-driven spectacle, Dubois wrote, "Aura is a radical act of quiet confidence." The anonymous designer, rumored to be a single fiercely private artisan, is not selling a name but a feeling. The garments are an intimate conversation between fabric and form. To wear Aura is not to scream, "Look at me," but to command attention with the sheer force of impeccable construction and understated grace. This is not fashion for the masses. It is armor for the discerning, a secret shared among those who understand that true luxury doesn't need to shout. Evelyn kept a copy of the magazine open on her desk. She had read the article a dozen times, each time feeling a thrill that was entirely her own. Armor for the discerning. Dubois understood. She understood what Evelyn was trying to do. The success was both exhilarating and terrifying. The demand was exploding. Finn was fielding calls from major department stores, from stylists, from investors, wanting to buy a piece of the mystery. "We're at a crossroads," Finn said one afternoon, pacing the studio floor. "We can't stay a 2-person operation forever. The ready-to-wear line needs to scale up or we'll be crushed by the demand. And the couture requests are insane." The crown princess of a minor European nation wants a gown for the royal wedding. Evelyn felt a wave of vertigo. A princess. It was all happening so fast. "We're not ready for that kind of expansion, Finn. The quality is everything. If we scale up too quickly, we lose what makes Aura special." "I know," he said, stopping to look at her. "Which is why we need to be strategic. I've found a small family-owned atelier in Italy that can handle a larger production run of the ready-to-wear line. The quality is superb. It would free you up to focus purely on the couture and the core design." It was a sensible solution, but Evelyn hesitated. It meant letting go, trusting others with her vision. It was another step out of the shadows and into a much larger world. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon was also reading Genevieve Dubois' article. He'd found it on Bethany's nightstand. He read the words, "Quiet confidence, understated. Grace doesn't need to shout," and felt a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. They were concepts he associated with weakness, with his ex-wife. How could they possibly be the description of the world's most coveted luxury brand? It didn't compute. To him, luxury was a megaphone. It was a Bugatti, a Patek Philippe, a front row seat. It was loud, but the world, at least this influential corner of it, was telling him he was wrong. "Did you see Bethany?" asked, coming into the room, wrapped in a silk robe. "She called us the discerning." She had completely co-opted the brand's identity as her own. In her mind, by wearing Aura, she was Aura. "I saw," Arthur said, closing the magazine. "Their agent has been in touch, by the way." Bethany squealed with delight. "And what did they say about the wedding dress?" Arthur felt a familiar pang of annoyance at having to report the news. "They're particular. They've agreed to consider the commission. But they have terms." "Terms? What terms?" "First, a non-refundable design deposit of $50,000, just to create the initial sketches." Bethany didn't even blink. To her, it was a rounding error. To Arthur, whose finances were becoming more precarious by the day, it was a gut punch. "Second," he continued, his voice tight, "the designer Aura insists on a private meeting with the bride. Alone. to understand her essence before beginning the design process. A meeting. Bethany gasped. A real meeting. With Aura. Oh my God, Arthur. No one gets to meet Aura. I'll be the first. What will I wear? What will I say? She was already spiraling into a vortex of excited preparation. Arthur, however, was stuck on the absurdity of the situation. This phantom designer was now dictating terms to him, summoning his fiancée, like a queen summoning a courtier. The meeting is to be held at the designer's private atelier, he added, reading from the agent's email on his phone. No photographs, no companions, and the location will only be disclosed 24 hours in advance. A non-disclosure agreement is required. It's all so mysterious, so chic. Bethany swooned. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Arthur watched her, a cold feeling creeping up his spine. The world was changing, and the rules he had always played by seemed to be shifting under his feet. Power, he was discovering, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was a mysterious, unseen woman who could command a $50,000 deposit for a sketch and summon the city's most sought-after heiress to a secret meeting. He hated it. He hated the feeling of not being in control. But he was trapped. He needed the Cole family money, and the price of that was Bethany's happiness. And the price of her happiness was now inextricably linked to this ghost named Aura. Unbeknownst to him, in a quiet studio across town, the ghost was preparing for the meeting. Evelyn stood before a mannequin draped in ivory silk. She was sketching not a wedding dress, but a plan for a conversation. She felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't nervous about meeting the woman who had replaced her. She was curious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about research. Bethany Cole was the embodiment of the world Arthur had wanted Evelyn to be a part of. To design the ultimate dress for her, Evelyn needed to understand that world, not as an outsider, but from the inside. She needed to understand the woman Arthur had chosen. She needed to understand what he valued. And in doing so, perhaps she could finally fully understand why he had never valued her. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a shroud of secrecy that Bethany found thrilling and Arthur found deeply irritating. A black car dispatched by the Aura agent arrived at their penthouse precisely at 2 o'clock. Bethany, having spent the entire morning agonizing over her outfit, finally settled on a Dior pantsuit, powerful but respectful, and emerged looking like she was about to negotiate a corporate merger. "I can't believe you're not allowed to come," she said to Arthur, for the 10th time adjusting the collar of her jacket. "Just remember what we talked about," Arthur said, his tone that of a coach sending a player into the big game. "Be charming, emphasize the prestige of the wedding, the guest list. Make sure this Aura person understands that this isn't just any commission, it's a career-making opportunity." Bethany rolled her eyes. "I think Aura is already doing just fine, Arthur. Try not to worry. I'll be back in a few hours, hopefully, with a wedding dress in the works." She kissed him on the cheek and swept out of the apartment. Arthur watched from the window as the black car pulled away, a small, dark vessel disappearing into the city's vast circulatory system. He felt completely powerless, a feeling he utterly despised. He paced the length of his living room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated form. To distract himself, he decided to do what he did best: investigate. He opened his laptop and typed Aura Designer Atelier location into the search bar. The results were, as expected, fruitless. Message boards were filled with speculation, but there was no concrete information. The brand's digital footprint was a masterclass in controlled anonymity. Frustrated, he called a man he knew named Patrick, a private investigator he occasionally used for discreet corporate due diligence. Patrick was expensive, but he was good. Patrick, Arthur said, his voice clipped. "I have a small personal project for you. It's time-sensitive." "Name it," came the gruff reply. "A fashion brand. Aura. I want to know who is behind it. I want a name, an address, a history, everything. Aura. Patrick sounded surprised. That's a tough one, Mr. Penhaligon. They're famously airtight. Everyone has a weakness, Arthur snapped. Follow the money, the corporate filings, the agent they use, the car service they hired today. I want an answer by the end of the day. It'll cost you, Patrick warned. Just get it done, Arthur said, and hung up. Meanwhile, Bethany's car was weaving its way out of the familiar territory of Midtown and into a neighborhood she rarely, if ever, ventured into. The skyscrapers gave way to older, more uniform buildings of brick and stone. The storefronts changed from global luxury brands to independent bookstores and small artisanal shops. The car finally stopped in front of an unassuming grey stone building with a discreet black-painted door. There was no sign, no plaque. A woman in a simple, elegant black dress was waiting. "Miss Cole," she asked politely. "This way, please." Bethany was led through the door and up 3 flights of stairs. The air grew quieter with each step. The woman opened a final door and gestured for Bethany to enter. "Aura will be with you shortly." Bethany stepped inside and the door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone. The room was breathtaking. It was not the opulent velvet-draped salon she had imagined. It was a working studio, vast, airy, and filled with light. Bolts of fabric were stacked like a library of textures. Sketches were pinned to a wall. Mannequins stood in thoughtful poses. The room smelled of clean linen charcoal and something floral like jasmine tea. It felt sacred. She wandered deeper into the room, running her hand over a bolt of heavy silk. The quality was undeniable. She saw a dress in progress on one of the mannequins, a column of deep emerald green, its seams pinned with surgical precision. This was a place of serious work. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." The voice was quiet, calm, and came from behind her. Bethany turned. Standing there was a woman. She was dressed simply in tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was intelligent and serene. She looked familiar, but Bethany couldn't place her. There was an air of quiet authority about her, but she wasn't what Bethany had expected at all. She had pictured some flamboyant, eccentric artist. This woman was composed. "You're Aura?" Bethany asked, a little thrown. "I am the designer behind Aura," the woman said with a small, polite smile. She did not offer her name. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you some tea?" They sat in 2 simple but elegant armchairs near the large windows. The woman Aura poured tea into delicate ceramic cups. She moved with an unhurried grace that Bethany found both calming and slightly intimidating. "Your celestial magic gown was a pleasure to create." Aura began, her voice smooth and even. The beadwork was inspired by the hoarfrost on winter branches. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Bethany said, meaning it sincerely. Everyone was captivated by it. "Good design shouldn't captivate," Aura corrected gently. "It should liberate. It should feel like the purest version of yourself." She looked at Bethany with discerning eyes. "Tell me about the wedding, not the venue or the guest list. Tell me how you want to feel on that day." The question caught Bethany off guard. No other designer had ever asked her that. They asked about silhouettes, necklines, fabrics. They asked about trends. Arthur had told her to talk about status, about making a statement. But this quiet, intense woman was asking about her feelings. For the next hour they talked, or rather Bethany talked. Prodded by Aura's insightful, gentle questions, she found herself speaking not just about the wedding, but about her life. She spoke of the pressure of being a Cole, the constant expectation to be perfect, to be dazzling. She admitted that sometimes the galas and the parties felt like a performance, and that she wasn't always sure who she was when the costume came off. She had never spoken this way to anyone, least of all to Arthur. The designer listened patiently, her grey eyes watchful and intelligent. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were perceptive, cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. It seems to me, Aura said finally, as the light outside began to fade, that you are caught between wanting to be a monument and wanting to be a woman. The world expects you to be a monument. Your dress should allow you to be a woman. Bethany stared at her mesmerized. Yes, she whispered. That's it. That's exactly it. As she was leaving, feeling lighter and more understood than she had in years, a thought struck her. The designer's face was still naggingly familiar. Have we met before? Bethany asked at the door. Aura's calm expression didn't waver. I'm not a very social person. I doubt our paths would have crossed. The answer was smooth, definitive. Bethany let it go. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was pacing like a caged tiger. His phone finally rang. It was Patrick. You're not going to believe this, the investigator said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. Aura is registered as a sole proprietorship. I had to pull property deeds and utility records for the atelier address the car service dropped at. The owner of the brand, the sole designer, the woman who owns that studio, her name is Evelyn Reed. Arthur froze. The world tilted on its axis. What did you say, Evelyn Reed? As in your ex-wife? Arthur sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. Evelyn dreary, simple, practical Evelyn. The woman he had mocked, pitied, and discarded. It was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. But as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed, he knew it was true. Her hobby, her quiet nature, her strange, placid reaction at the gala. Her comment, practicality has its merits. It lasts. And the dress, the celeste gown, his symbol of triumph, of trading up. He had paid his ex-wife, the woman he considered a failure, a small fortune to make his new fiancée look like a queen. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. Just then, the door opened. Bethany swept in, her face glowing. Arthur. It was incredible. She's a genius, an absolute genius. You should have heard the things she said. She gets it. She gets me. She gushed. Arthur looked at her, at the woman he was pinning all his hopes on, and all he could see was the ghost of his wife. He had sent Bethany into the lion's den, and she had come back calling the lion a visionary. She's going to design the dress, Bethany announced, beaming. And Arthur, I think it's going to be the most beautiful dress in the world. Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of rage, shock, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. The weeks leading up to the Metropolitan Fashion Vanguard Awards were a blur of activity for everyone involved, though for vastly different reasons. For Evelyn, it was a period of intense, focused creation. After her meeting with Bethany, she had designed a wedding dress that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It was not the monumental, attention-grabbing gown Bethany thought she wanted. Instead, it was a study in vulnerability and strength, made of a heavy liquid silk crepe that moved like water. It had long, clean lines, a dramatic sweeping back, and sleeves so delicately embroidered with tiny seed pearl blossoms that they seemed to have grown there. It was a dress for a woman, not an heiress. Bethany had wept when she saw the sketches. But beyond the wedding dress, bigger news was brewing. Genevieve Dubois, having championed Aura from the beginning, had used her considerable influence. Aura was to be presented with the Emerging Designer of the Year award at the upcoming Vanguard ceremony, the most prestigious event on the fashion calendar. The one condition of accepting the award was that the designer behind Aura would finally have to reveal their identity. Finn had argued for it passionately. This is it, Ev. This is the moment. You can't stay a ghost forever. You've built the foundation. The work speaks for itself. Now it's time to claim it. It's time for Evelyn Reed to take a bow. Evelyn, after much soul-searching, agreed. It was time. Her anonymity had served its purpose. It had protected her, allowed her to build her business on merit alone. Now, stepping into the light felt less like a risk and more like a final necessary step in her own liberation. For Arthur, Those same weeks were a private hell. The knowledge that Evelyn was aura festered inside him like a poison. Every excited mention of the brand from Bethany, every gushing compliment about the mysterious designer's genius was a fresh twist of the knife. He was trapped in a farce of his own making. His fiancée was idolizing his ex-wife, and he was footing the bill. His financial situation had also worsened. The energy stock had collapsed, wiping out a significant portion of his capital. He was now more dependent than ever on his marriage to Bethany. He couldn't afford to rock the boat. He couldn't expose Evelyn without exposing his own foolishness, without destroying Bethany's happiness, and with it his own financial salvation. So he said nothing. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the proud, supportive fiancé, while inside he was consumed by a helpless rage. He tried to subtly poison the well. "Are you sure about the dress, darling?" he'd ask. "It seems a bit simple in the sketches." "It's not simple, Arthur, it's sublime." Bethany would counter completely under Evelyn's spell. Aura says that true elegance is quiet. The words were Evelyn's, and hearing them from Bethany's lips was a unique form of torture. The night of the Vanguard Awards arrived. It was the social apex of the season held at the Museum of Modern Art. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs and couture. Arthur stood stiffly beside Bethany, his smile a tight, painful rictus. Bethany was a vision. She was wearing another custom aura creation for the event, a gown of shimmering, pewter-colored silk, elegant and striking. She was once again the center of attention. "Isn't it thrilling?" she whispered to him as they took their seats in the grand auditorium. "They say Aura is going to be revealed tonight when she accepts her award. We'll finally get to see her." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. He knew what was coming. He could have warned Bethany, could have saved her the public shock. But a dark, selfish part of him wanted her to feel the same humiliation he felt. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The ceremony began. Awards were presented, speeches were made. Finally, Genevieve Dubois took the stage to present the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The room fell silent. There are moments in fashion. Genevieve began, her voice resonating through the auditorium, when a new voice emerges that is so clear, so confident, and so utterly original that it changes the conversation. This year, that voice belongs to Aura. A montage of Aura's designs flashed on the giant screens. The actress at the airport, the French heiress, and finally, a stunning editorial shot of the Celeste gown. Bethany gasped and squeezed Arthur's arm. "That's my dress." Aura has reminded us, Genevieve continued, that craftsmanship is not old-fashioned, that silence can be more powerful than noise, and that a garment's true value lies not in its label, but in its soul. The designer built this brand from the ground up on her own terms, letting the work speak for itself. She is a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of artistry in a world obsessed with fame. Arthur felt his collar grow tight. Genevieve was telling Evelyn's story, his story, but from a very different perspective. "It is my profound honor to announce that the winner of the 2025 Emerging Designer of the Year award is Aura, and the incredible woman behind it, Ms. Evelyn Reed." The name hung in the air for a moment. There was a smattering of confused applause. Evelyn Reed. The name was unfamiliar to most. And then, from a side aisle, Evelyn emerged. She was wearing a simple, exquisitely cut black jumpsuit of her own design. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked poised, confident, and serene. She looked nothing like the drab, defeated woman Arthur had painted in his memory. She looked like a creator, a powerhouse. The camera projecting her image onto the screens panned for reactions in the audience. It found Bethany Cole. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the screen to the stage, and then to the man beside her face a mask of confusion. And then, the camera found Arthur. His face was pale, his expression frozen in a silent scream of utter abject horror. The two shots, the shocked fiancé and the humiliated ex-husband, were broadcast for the entire fashion world to see. Bethany turned to him, her eyes flashing with a million questions. But before she could speak, Evelyn reached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her calm, grey eyes sweeping over the room until for a brief, searing moment they met Arthur's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no malice. There was only a quiet finality. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Genevieve and the Vanguard Committee. They say to build something new, you first have to tear down the old. I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Arthur Penhaligon. He taught me through his own actions the profound importance of self-worth. He was the one who first showed me that judging a woman by the simplicity of her clothes is a fool's game. Because you never know. She might have designed the dress your fiancé is wearing." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. It was a perfectly delivered, devastatingly elegant coup de grace. Every eye in the room swiveled from Evelyn on the stage to Arthur and Bethany. Bethany looked down at her pewter gown as if it had caught fire. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. She stared at Arthur not with confusion anymore, but with the cold, hard light of dawning comprehension and utter betrayal. Arthur didn't see her look. He was just staring at the stage, at the woman he had so casually discarded. She hadn't just built an empire from the ashes of their marriage. She had used his own arrogance as the blueprint. And she had just unveiled her masterpiece on the biggest stage in the world, leaving him buried in the rubble. The aftermath of the Vanguard Awards was a nuclear winter for Arthur Penhaligon. The story was simply too juicy to be ignored. It had everything: a scorned wife's triumphant return, a clueless heiress, and a pompous, arrogant husband receiving his public comeuppance. The gossip columns and fashion blogs feasted on it for weeks. They called it the Aura Affair and the Penhaligon Predicament. Photos of Arthur's horrified face and Bethany's shocked expression were juxtaposed with images of Evelyn's serene, powerful acceptance speech. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, glacial affair. Bethany sat on the far side of the limousine, her arms crossed, her aura gown, looking like a cruel joke. Arthur tried to speak, to formulate a defense, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? "I'm sorry I mocked my ex-wife while secretly making you her biggest patron. I'm sorry, I'm a fool." When they arrived, Bethany didn't even look at him. She walked straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, her father, a formidable man, with cold, calculating eyes, arrived with two of his lawyers. The meeting was short and brutal. The engagement was off. All financial ties between the Coles and Arthur were severed. Mr. Cole made it icily clear that Arthur's name was now poison in their world. The wedding, the merger, the financial safety net, it all vanished in an instant, left alone in the sterile white penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum. Arthur's world fully collapsed. The loss of the Cole fortune meant his creditors, who had been patient in anticipation of his marriage, came calling. The leveraged bets on the energy stock became an anchor, pulling him down into a sea of debt. Within 3 months, he was forced to sell the penthouse, his car, and his collection of expensive watches. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack replacements. The Titan of finance was reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at the same parties he used to command. He saw Evelyn one last time months later. It was a chance encounter on a busy street. He was rushing to a job interview for a mid-level analyst position. She was stepping out of a black car, looking effortlessly chic in a camel-colored aura coat on her way into a building that probably housed her new expanded headquarters. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. He saw no pity, no gloating. He saw nothing at all. To her, he was just a man in a crowd, a ghost from a past she had long since moved beyond. That indifference was more painful than any hatred could ever be. Evelyn's world, in contrast, was dawning. Revealing her identity had been like throwing gasoline on the fire of her success. Aura, now attached to the compelling story of Evelyn Reed, became the most sought-after brand in the world. Investors lined up, but she chose her partners carefully, retaining full creative control. She opened a flagship store in Soho, a minimalist temple to her design philosophy. She accepted the commission from the European princess. Her brand became synonymous with intelligent, empowered luxury. She never spoke of Arthur publicly again. Her speech at the awards had been the first and last word on the matter. It wasn't a story she needed to tell. It was a foundation she had built upon. One evening, months after the awards, she was in her new larger studio working late. The space was beautiful, overlooking the city lights. Finn came in with 2 cups of tea, a ritual that had remained unchanged. "The final numbers for the quarter are in," he said, setting a cup on her desk. "We've exceeded our projections by 200%. "That's good," Evelyn said, smiling, but her eyes were on a sketch in front of her. "Just good," Finn teased, leaning against the desk. "Ev, we're building an empire." She looked up at him, her grey eyes clear and bright. "We're building beautiful things, Finn. That's what matters." She took a sip of her tea. "The empire is just a happy consequence." He watched her for a moment, the woman he had seen at her lowest, now so firmly at her highest. Her success wasn't a revenge story, he realized. Revenge is a hot, messy, finite emotion. This was different. This was a story of creation. She hadn't focused on destroying Arthur's world. She had been too busy building her own. His collapse was merely a side effect of her rise, a shadow cast by her growing light. Evelyn looked out the vast window at the glittering cityscape. She had once felt so small in this city, invisible beside a man who demanded all the light for himself. Now she knew the truth. The brightest light doesn't need to be demanded. It simply needs to be created. And from now on, she would be the one to create it. And so Arthur Penhaligon became a footnote in Evelyn Reed's incredible story. He learnt the hard way that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes, but by the substance of their character and the strength of their spirit. Evelyn's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her refusal to become like the man who wronged her. She found her power not in public revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable excellence of her work. Her story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most extraordinary things to show the world. What did you think of Evelyn's ultimate comeback? Was it a perfect act of poetic justice, or would you have wanted a more direct confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. If this story of quiet triumph and self-made success resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a story of true empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama that will leave you thinking long after it's over. Thank you for listening.